Welcome back to the program. We're talking tonight to Liberal MP Alex Hawke, Financial Review columnist Rowan Dean, Tim Ayres from the AMWU, and Labor MP Ed Husic. Alex Hawke, to you, just on some of the wash-up from the election result, because I'm not sure if we've spoken much since then. In Western Sydney, in particular, clearly, you know, the Liberal Party did well nationally, very well, but in Western Sydney concerns have been raised, particularly by Ross Cameron, former Liberal MP, a regular contributor to this program. He points out that his old seat of Parramatta and the seat of Greenway, the Liberals failed to win them back, and he's pointed to poor candidate selection, Jamie Diaz in particular in Greenway, and a failure to tackle entrenched factionalism. Do you accept those arguments?
Yeah, well, look, this is a good question. It's something I'm happy to tackle tonight, and I think you've got to do that in taking a minute on it. I think you've got to separate Jamie Diaz and Greenway. I think it's a very separate category of what happened in Western Sydney. If you look at the Liberal Party's performance over 2 elections in Western Sydney and in New South Wales more broadly, we've had a pretty stunning performance. This time around we've had a net gain in New South Wales of 10 seats, and in Western Sydney we've done much above the statewide average of 3.2%. So Parramatta is a very good example of what has been happening in Western Sydney for a long time, where all credit to her, Julie Owens is a tough incumbent. She's been there for a long time now. She's very difficult to dislodge. But Martin Zader was an outstanding candidate for that seat. He delivered a swing of 3.7%, which is bigger than neighbouring Reid, which we won off the Labor Party.
But you're not going to get better conditions than you had to win a seat like Parramatta back, eh?
Oh, absolutely. You know, Martin was running in his first election against a very difficult incumbent. I mean, Tony Abbott was a regular visitor to Western Sydney. He's been very well received. And we had an election where you saw people like Ed Husic and Chris Bowen fighting for their lives in their own seats. And since the election, the Labor Party's been crowing that we held, you know, Chifley, McMahon and Werriwa. Well, it would be like me coming here onto this program and saying, well, look, the Liberal Party's held Warringah, Barowra and Mitchell. You know, we should celebrate and break out the champagne.
Yeah. What about Jamie Diaz, though, in Greenway?
Yeah, well, look, obviously some errors have been made in relation to the campaign in Greenway, and, you know, he's a nice young man, but he made a big mistake and the errors have been made since.
He made a mistake, clearly, with that interview where he couldn't explain the policy. But was it then also a mistake from the campaign to shut him away for the whole rest of the campaign, really emphasised the problem?
Yeah, well, look, a lot of mistakes were made. And I think if you look at Greenway, though, this is twice now this has happened, where the electorate is really saying, you know, we want to change and we want to vote for the Liberal Party. And the Western Sydney trend is so strong. I mean, the Liberal Party's performed so strong in Western Sydney all across the board.
Who's to blame for putting him up twice?
Well, it happens in a political party that sometimes you get your candidates right. We've had excellent candidates in Fiona Scott. We had a very strong candidate in Ray King. We had a very strong university student that gave you a lot of trouble in Chifley, Ed. And we also had a great candidate in Martin Zader. Craig Laundy, Banks, you know, all these seats we won.
But Jamie Diaz was a dud.
Can't get it 100% right. And sometimes you can get better candidates. There was 8 candidates contesting that pre-selection, and I'm sure that'll be the subject of an internal review.
Rowan, do you agree with everything?
I don't know. I think Jamie Diaz, I actually met him after he did his Chaser thing. Yeah, no, after the election and after he appeared on the Chaser and made a joke and did a very good job. Did a good job of making a joke of what had happened. Had he done that during the election, I reckon he may well have won it. So, and seriously, because you know, making him disappear, the Liberals putting him, you know, tucking him away was a big mistake.
Kind of put in neon lights, didn't it? This guy's a dud, this guy's a dud.
He should have been given the chance to redeem himself with humour or without humour. When he did it with humour, it worked.
3 things on this, David. Firstly, the problem for poor Jamie Diaz, and I think the Chaser did him a favour, actually, because it would be a very tough experience for a kid like that. But the problem for him was he was exposed as a bad candidate for the second election running, and the Liberal Party organisation's choice was hide him or expose him more. I'm not sure whether they made the wrong call or not. I think the problem was the candidate. The second thing is the lessons for Labor in our campaigns in Western Sydney are very important. Where we've got really strong local candidates and a big volunteer effort, knocking on doors, engaging with the community, it's actually held seats that these guys, and the journos predicted that Labor wouldn't be able to hold. The third point is I just think there's some early signs.
Yeah, like Indi.
Early signs. I mean, Indi is a bit like having, the result in Indi is a bit like having the house burned down and come back 2 days later and find out the cat's still alive.
What we were talking about.
But there are early signs of big problems here for the Liberals. Rampant factionalism in Western Sydney, making decisions for their cabinet picks based on factionalism and based on regionalism, claiming it's about merit and locking women out of their cabinet. Some real problems.
Very quickly, Tim, you do keep forgetting that Labor has just had the worst defeat ever in 100 years, and you keep brushing that under the carpet with these other little things. It's got to own up to it.
As a Western Sydney MP, these guys were banking a number of seats that they thought that they were just in the bag, and it didn't turn out to be that way. And that is because of the fact that, too, in terms of I think it's actually quite bad to sheet everything home to Jamie Diaz. I think the points that were made in terms of the way that the selection process occurred because of the factionalism, particularly in Western Sydney, the hard right within the Liberal Party that's had an influence on these candidates. The second is, and you hit on it, and Rowan hit on it, which is they made, and this is why I say it's being hard on Jamie Diaz, a decision was made not to allow him to do, and I agree with you, if he'd done the Chaser skit or had made light of his performance in the middle of a campaign, who knows what the contest would have been like.
I'll just make 2 final quick points, David, because I mean it is cute to let Ed get away with this. I mean they can focus on Jamie Diaz all they like. The fact is Chris Bowen could not attend the campaign launch of his own party because he was tied down in his own seat fighting for his very survival. Same with Ed and same with a lot of other key Labor figures in heartland Labor seats.
Did you make it to the campaign launch?
In Queensland, no. I was busy fighting my heartland Liberal seat where I got a good swing. But the only second point I'd make, just to correct Ed, there are no factions in the Liberal Party.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay, well, let's go through your seat.
Just a couple of issues finally, and this is completely different. In Tasmania today, legislation introduced to legalise voluntary euthanasia. It's been a long time, more than a decade, since any political party, major party, has seriously tackled this issue. The last time was the Northern Territory. They passed laws in '95 that were then overturned by the federal parliament in '96 fairly promptly. A bit harder to do that when it's a state rather than a territory that legislates on this. We'll see if it gets through the parliament there, but it does raise this issue once again that politicians obviously often don't like talking about much, even though there is strong community support for voluntary euthanasia. I think the latest news poll, which was last year on this, had 80% community support. Rowan Dean, do you think this... well, firstly, is this likely to get up, do you think? And where's the debate going to go on it?
It may well get up at the state level, but ultimately it can't get up, nor should it, federally. I mean, the problem with euthanasia, I mean, I've been in a position recently seeing someone I love very much dying and wishing that they could be killed. It's a horrible situation to be in, and even so, the idea that someone could be killed through a mistake or through some kind of malpractice or some kind of, someone who's not quite really does want to kill himself is too great a mistake. It's just too much risk that something could go wrong. For the vast majority it wouldn't, but that idea that it could be abused is just too strong. Yeah,
Lara Giddings, the Premier, has put a lot of safeguards in there, but you're saying you can never give a guarantee.
You can never give a 100% guarantee.
Look, I agree with this. I think this is obviously a matter for the Tasmanian Parliament first thing, and obviously we don't know the outcome, and that'll be something we look at afterwards. But from a personal perspective, I very much understand, and I think with euthanasia, the question becomes, the closer you are to someone who's had a problem, the more difficult this gets as a moral issue. Personally, I've always leaned against euthanasia, even seeing some people in very difficult situations myself. But again, when you go into it as a legislator, when you look at this and you say, well, how do you design and construct a system where this is possible, it becomes a very difficult thing to do. Almost verging on the impossible. Yeah, well, so I've asked for a copy of that bill, so I haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
It's apparently got, you not only have to have one doctor and written approval and cooling off period and all that, but then a second doctor has to go through it all, make sure it's not just depression that's put you in this position. Tim Ayres, what do you think about this whole thing?
Well, I think that if I had to make a choice about this issue, I'd probably, and I think the way that Alex puts it, lean in the other direction to how it's been put. You know, I think the really important thing about this debate is that it's done in the mainstream and it's done in a really respectful and considered way. And I think that the Tasmanian Parliament will do that. I watched with alarm at the way that the euthanasia debate was handled in the New South Wales Parliament recently. I thought that sensationalising these issues sent a very bad message and a very hurtful message. And I think we've got to do a lot better as a community in the way that we deal with these issues. There is strong support in the community for these sorts of measures. It's got to be dealt with, though, by the legislators in a way that builds the right safeguards. But I really want to make sure, I really want to see this debate handled smartly, in a sophisticated way, in a way that's sensitive to the real suffering of people out there.
Yeah, Ed Husic.
It'd take a lot of convincing for me to support it. As a legislator, echoing some of Alex's comments, I would hate to think that we had a system where a mistake was made. It's a terrible position to be in terms of knowing the incredible pain people are going through. But I just can't, at this stage, see myself voting in favour of, if it were to pass, that, you know, there was at a federal level a similar sort of discussion taking place. I'd find it very hard to support.
Yeah, I think, and obviously it would in the end be a conscience vote, as it is in the Tasmanian Parliament as well, and rightly should be on a life and death matter. But look, there's no denying that some people are in a situation where they very keenly want to be able to end their lives. They are suffering, you know, through things that we can't imagine. But is it too hard to put together a set of laws that allow that to happen without?
It's possibly the most difficult question you can come across, which is to actually legislate to provide for. It won't be people ending their own lives, but for somebody else, the conditions for somebody else to end another person's life. A very dangerous area of law, very dangerous thing to do, and from medical view and other views. So it's got to be looked at. It's got to be looked at very closely with, as I think Tim says, full respect to all points of view. But as a legislator, I'm inherently sceptical we can design a system which will not prevent human error and problems occurring.
But I think Tim's point's absolutely right about doing it in a respectful way and doing it in an open way, and being able to have that discussion publicly, so that you're bringing the public with you on this issue. But it is very, very hard.
Well, it's a debate that may well be coming to the federal arena soon, pending what happens there in Tasmania. Look, on that note, we're going to have to wrap things up. Alex Hawke, Rowan Dean, Tim Ayres, Ed Husic, great to talk to you all this week. Thanks so much for that. Thanks for your company as well. We'll be back same time next week. See you then.